Today's session will be about the type of directive words as well as the kind of questions which are asked in the mains examination. There are many aspirants who are normally confused in terms of what each of these directive words means and will that have any impact on the kind of answer that they are writing. The questions where you find these directives being used, you will have really no trouble understanding the question as well as addressing it. First type is direct questions. Questions which are rather factual or descriptive in nature. The other kind of questions are called opinion-based questions. Good evening, aspirants. Welcome to day 3 of Mission Main series by PW OnlyIAS. Today's session will be about the type of directive words as well as the kind of questions which are asked in the mains examination. Now, why we are conducting this session about the types of questions and directives is precisely because there are many aspirants who are normally confused in terms of what each of these directive words means and will that have any impact on the kind of answer that they are writing. In fact, so much so that there is both long form and short form content available on YouTube trying to describe each of these directive words. Now, there are many types of directive words: explain, elucidate, elaborate, critically discuss, enumerate, analyze. There is no need for us to go into the semantics behind these directives. What we feel is that understanding the type of question is actually the real issue. Now let's start with directives. What kind of directive words do we normally find? Broadly, we can categorize all types of directive words into these two broad categories: descriptive directives and critical or analytical directives. Descriptive directives will include things like define, comment, discuss, describe, elaborate, explain, and elucidate. While critical and analytical directives will include something like analyze, will include something like assess, compare, evaluate, or justify. In addition, if you find the word critically with any of these descriptive directives, that also makes the question more critical or more analytical in nature. Now, descriptive directives are relatively straightforward. The questions where you find these directives being used, you will have really no trouble understanding the question as well as addressing it. But such questions where you will find critical or analytical directives, such questions may be challenging for some people to solve. Now, this is broadly the types of directives. Let us try to look at the various types of questions, which in our opinion is actually more important than the types of directives. The reason we say that is because many times in these questions, you may not find any directive word. Does that mean you will not have to write an answer? Of course you will. So what we have done is we have categorized the types of questions across 4 categories. First type is direct questions, questions which are rather factual or descriptive in nature. For an example, look at this question. How does e-technology help farmers in production and marketing of agricultural produce? Explain it. Even if you did not have this directive word, explain it here, you could have still gone ahead and solved this question. Now, this is a relatively straightforward question. What he is expecting you to answer is simply the role of e-technology in helping farmers produce and in helping farmers market their agricultural produce. Not a lot of challenge trying to understand this question. The other kind of questions are called opinion-based questions. Now, opinion-based questions, many times you will find, will not contain any directive words. Look at this question for an example. This question asks you, do you think marriages as a sacrament is losing its value in modern India? Now, this is a question where the examiner is seeking your opinion on a certain matter. The matter with respect to the sacrosanct nature of marriages and your opinion on whether there is an erosion of the sacramental nature of marriages in India. Now, such type of questions will require perspectives from your end. They will require perspectives in support as well as against the main premise of the question itself. The third type of question is mixed thought questions. Questions which may even be contradictory in nature. Questions where you will find that the question itself contains both perspectives on the topic at hand. Look at this question for an example. Why is caste identity in India both fluid and static? what the examiner wants you to answer is the static nature of caste system in India, which is say some aspects of caste system and its features which are unchanging, which have remained persistent through time. And he's also asking you to address the fluid or the more dynamic nature of caste system in India, as to what features of caste system in India have witnessed changes over time. This is a contradictory type of a question or a mixed thought question, where you have to address both aspects of caste system within the answer itself. And the fourth more common type of questions are statement based or premise based questions. Here you will find that there will be a statement given in the question itself, followed by a question as well as a directive word. For an example, consider this question. The use of unmanned aerial vehicles by our adversaries across the borders to ferry arms, ammunition, drugs, etc. is a serious threat to the internal security. Comment on the measures being taken to tackle this threat. Now, if you read this question specifically, that you will understand that he is asking you the measures which are being taken to tackle this threat, the threat presented by the use of unmanned aerial vehicles. But because there is a premise in the question itself, there is a statement in the question itself, you are expected to establish the premise itself. You are expected to explain the meaning or why the examiner has used this statement. You have to establish this first and then address the measures being taken to tackle this issue. Now, like we said, sometimes the questions may or may not present any directives. For example, look at this question. There is absolutely no directive here. Look at the previous question. There is absolutely no directive here. So what we feel is that what is more important than going into the semantics behind directives is actually understanding the type of questions. Now let's try to see how do we address the various kinds of directives. Broadly speaking, just remember that there are two types, descriptive and critical or analytical. Every time you find a question which has a descriptive directive, right, which is to say where they are asking you to define something, comment on something, describe something, explain something, elaborate on something, elucidate on something, right? These questions are relatively straightforward. Here, the semantics behind each of these directives as to what comment means compared to describe, that is not going to change your answer significantly. Now look at this type of a question. Explain the role of geographical factors in the development of ancient India. Now, relatively a straightforward question. Even if he had written here the word elucidate or throw light upon, in which case, would it have changed or made any impact on the kind of answer that you're going to write? Absolutely not. Now, as a thumb rule for questions like these, where you have descriptive directives, the thumb rule is that 80% of your answer should have content directly relevant to the question asked. The question here is for you to throw some light upon the geographical factors responsible for the development in ancient India. You'll straight up have to use points which are directly relevant here. 20% of your answer, more specifically towards the conclusion, should be about other unasked directives, things which have not been asked. The rule is very simple. It's an 80-20 rule for all directive questions. That means 80% of your answer should be directly relevant to the demand of the question. 20% of your answer, more specifically towards conclusion and even introduction for that matter, could be about things which have not directly been asked in this question itself. Now, there is another type where the directives would significantly impact your answers. These are either opinion-based questions, these are either mixed thought questions, or these are questions where they are using a critical or an analytical directive. For example, look at the same question again. Do you think marriages as a sacrament are losing value in modern India? This is an opinion-based question. He has not presented you any directive. Now, when he is asking you something like, in your opinion, do you think marriages are losing their sacred value in India? He's not expecting you to only substantiate this statement. He's asking your opinion that what do you think is really happening to marriages in India? He wants to know whether you know enough about marriages in India to comment on whether they are actually losing their sacramental value or not losing their sacramental value. What it means is that there is an unsaid directive here. The unsaid directive here is to critically analyze this statement itself. It's an opinion-based question. You'll have to present both types of views on this question. You'll have to first substantiate that yes, if you look at a certain few cases, it may appear that marriages in India are losing their sacramental value. But you'll have to then balance your answer and also suggest a few points which would be fundamentally against this premise, which is that marriages are losing their sacramental value. You'll have to present both sides of the coins in these types of questions. That means when you speak of questions which have descriptive directives, you will not have to think much. The rule is very simple. It's an 80-20 rule. But when you get questions which are either mixed thought questions or questions where there are critical or analytical directives being used, questions like these will require you to use a thumb rule which is 50-50. 50% of your answer should go towards substantiating the claim made in the question itself, while 50% of your answer should go towards refuting this claim. That's a very, very simple rule. Remember, 80-20 and 50-50. There is no other requirement for you to go in depth about other aspects of questions. Now, our final advice would be, very simply put, you do not have to go really deep into the meaning of each of these directive words. The semantics are not important. And if you have written a full-length test any time in your life, you will understand that you will not have a lot of time to actually think about each of these directive words, which is why classifying them into two buckets is always going to help you. The tone of the question is actually going to determine the content as well as the depth of your answer. You'll have to focus more on understanding the question rather than worrying about the directive words. If you understand the question, the structure of your answer and the contents of your answer will automatically align with the requirements of the question per se. Remember, the rule is very simple. 80-20, 50-50. Descriptive directives, 80-20. Critical directives, analytical directives, the rule is 50-50. That's very simple. Now, with that said, we will have another discussion in the subsequent video where we will discuss the actual art of writing answers. Learnings from the previous 3 videos is going to help you in the next session. We'll be waiting for you in the next class. Thank you.